examples and experiences of the climate action for a diverse audience interested in the agricultural sector and the region. It includes civil organizations, governments, private sector, in order to highlight the diversity of the things that are in their way. We're talking about climate action experiences, incentives to support the transition to resilient practices, as well as, carbon credits, direct payment, quality seals, and risk transfer. And we also are going to hear about national plans to support the sector. And in the future, we're going to listen about the international initiatives to promote the exchange of experiences and successful cases. Today, we will retake the second part of the webinar with presentations by three governments from the Americas and the Caribbean that are highlighting their experiences about the national mechanisms to fund their climate action plans, considering the any other sectors and with a specific focus on the agricultural sector. The second one in November, we will invite you again to hear about three international initiatives related to agriculture and climate change. And finally, on November 16, we will close the cycle with relevant information, pertinent information for agriculture and climate action before the international meeting that will be held in December. Meeting of the countries under the Framework Convention of the United Nations and Climate Change. Today, we will have the participation of representatives from the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources from the Dominican Republic, the Ministry of Finances from Chile, and Ministry of Finances and Public Credit from Mexico. They will explain to us the national mechanisms they are developing to support and invest in climate action in their countries. So it is important to admit that each country organizes a climate action under their political context and the specific institutional arrangements of the government. So we offer today the experiences of the countries to facilitate the information of the different strategies that are progressing in the region. During this session, we will analyze how these innovations, these financial innovations, can provide resources needed to promote the implementation of climate actions at the national level, promoting as well the adoption of sustainable agricultural practices as well as resilient practices in relation to climate change. Also, we will highlight the importance of the cooperation between public and private stakeholders to promote the right and sustainable funding aim to contribute to the transformation of the agricultural sector towards better climate resilience. For logistics aspects, if you're just joining the webinar, these events are accessible in English and Spanish. You select the language of your interest. It will be recorded as well. If you want to check some specific information. If you have a question, please type in the chat box your question during the presentations, and the speakers will answer after their presentation.
In English, please use the globe button at the bottom of your screen. Entonces, ya para empezar.
Okay, to begin with, I would like to invite our first speaker, Yunuen Hernandez Zuno from the Ministry of Finances and Public Credit from in Mexico to share Mexico's experience. Please, could you open your mic and share the screen? Yunuen, floor is yours. Thanks for being here with us. Hello, good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation made And I want to greet my colleagues from the Dominican Republic, Ivan Cruz, from the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources, Chile, Maria Paz Gutierrez from the Ministry of Finances, and thanks to Erin Wesley, advisor of the Sustainability and Climate Action Program from AICA, for inviting me today. Can you see my screen? Yes, but it is a Word document.
Ahora sí.
Okay, now that's okay.
Ya de estar viéndolo en forma de presentación, ¿correcto?
So, is better? Yes. Thank you. Go ahead. Well, first of all, and before talking about the thematic instruments Mexico has issued since 2020, I would like to give you an update of the things we have done these latest years besides the instruments. Recently, we published the Sustainable Finance Mobilization Strategy. The purpose is first to identify the needs, the funding needs by 2030. We have calculated that we need some 1.7 trillion of Mexican pesos annually, equivalent to 5.4% of the 2023 GDP. That tells us that there is a need around 13, 14 trillion of pesos for 2030. So the purpose of the strategy of sustainable finance mobilization strategy has the power, has the potential to mobilize this through 19 lines of action and through the three fundamental pillars. First one is sustainable financing public management. The idea is to streamline the sustainability in planning and public resources management. The second pillar, the mobilization of sustainable funding, and the purpose is to accelerate the resources through public and private sources and promote the adoption of ASG practices. Under this pillar, we include Mexico's taxonomy that was recently published. And as a last pillar, the cross-cutting actions. The idea is that we cannot advance in green agenda if you are not using the social agenda. So it is important to include the gender perspective, to integrate the gender perspective, and to implement this type of trainings and monitoring in the strategy. The plan for the future is that in the coming month, we will make this consultation through the sectors, public and private sectors, in order to identify these needs for action. As I mentioned before, recently we published the Sustainable Taxonomy from Mexico. Basically, what works for a taxonomy is to define the economic activities that are under the sustainability definition. This has a positive effect, environmental and social, a positive effect. And the structure of taxonomy is divided into 6 economic actors: agriculture and forestry, energy and water, manufacture, transport, construction, and waste management. The Secretary of Finances and Public Credit began with issuing this SDGs linked bonus since 2030. This is a line of action that supplements the strategy of mobilization of sustainable finances. The effort, we started implementing this effort before. Since 2020, we published what we call the sovereign bond reference framework linked to the sustainable development goals in order to access international funds. And recently, we started with the local market in order to promote the sustainable development. This framework identifies 3 key criteria. One, it has a quite robust criterion selection. So when selecting what are the projects or what we call eligible spending linked to this type of bonds, it has a governance structure, a robust structure of governance. We involve other agents and other ministries in the governance process to receive the feedback. And at the end, it is always important to have the active participation of these ministries. They are responsible of implementing or executing this eligible spending. And unlike issuing a conventional bond, the thematic bonds are this additional effort to make transparent the use of resources of these bonds in relation to the eligible spending. In big lines, what are the criteria, the selection criteria in order to categorize a project or budget as eligible spending? This is included in our reference framework, and we refer to 7 filters. The first one is since it is sovereign and since it is a particular characteristic in Mexico, our eligible expenses start from the budget of the federation, expenditure budget of the federation. So with this budget, we see what are the budgetary programs linked to an SDG that have a direct contribution. Mexico developed a methodology to link the budget to SDGs since 2018. And this methodology has been quite useful to identify the budgetary programs and to which SDGs they are directly and indirectly contributing to. We also follow our public that law. So we need to select budgetary programs that are investment for infrastructure, productive activities. We ensure that their programs have guidelines and operation rules in order. Our reference framework makes a difference in what can be funded and what cannot be funded. So what we call the negative spillovers. So you cannot have a thematic bond that will go for projects related to gas or oil or child work, things that are not allowed. We also have the priority principle criterion. We focus in programs that are of priority for the management with an amount, a broad budgeted amount. And finally, once we have the pool of eligible expenses, as you know, the social expenses need also a criterion, to identify the target population. In our case, Mexico has implemented the geospatial criterion. It is to identify the social expenditure in marginalized regions. So we are being sort of exclusive, identifying the needs in the marginalized areas of the country or regions of the country. In big lines, what is the process to issue a thematic bond? The pre-issuance phase, points 2 and 3, is what I already mentioned a little bit. Number 2 is the pyramid I just explained, and 3, this is an example of governance practices Mexico has in relation to the 2030 agenda. And we also go to the different committees of the 2030 agenda. There are several ministries from Mexico here to look for this feedback and to verify the eligible expenditures with them. In addition to this, as best practices, we always provide an external validation to eligible expenditures before going to the market. This is to ensure to guarantee to investors that we are following the best international practices, such as IGMA, those green bond principles, and sustainability bond principles. So post-issuance, As number four, so issuance of SDGs linked bonds. So it mentions the strategy of Mexico in relation to sustainability and the eligible expenditures of the year. What are which ones? And 1 year after the issuance of a thematic bond, you have this part of submitting a assignment impact report. So you show the investors how you spend the money and in what, and what are the results at the project level. For example, such as, the impact in the middle and long run because of these thematic instruments. And recently in Mexico, we included the participation of the Federation Superior Audit. They revise our impact assignment impact report to verify the best practices regarding sustainable funding of finances. Mexico has tried a lot to take care using these mechanisms of governance. The whole process in pre-issuance and post-issuance phases of these tools, of these instruments, we are following the best guidelines that exist in the market. In this slide, we explain more or less the mechanics of transparency of the expenditure. The Secretary of Finance is using these tools, and through the reports, they are making the public expenditure transparent, as well as these eligible expenses selected using the criteria I already mentioned. How this work regarding accounting aspects. When you issue a bond, this goes to the treasury of the federation, and the person in charge of distributing the public expenses, so finances, issues the report. As you can see, the criteria to the right is our report explaining how these eligible expenditures are related to the marginalized regions in the country. This we base on an index published by Coneval. Coneval is an institution that assesses the social policy in Mexico, and they conduct this index social backwardness indicator. And this way we see how the eligible expenses are being related to these regions. This is a sort of timeline Mexico has been creating. As I mentioned, since 2018, we started linking these SDGs link bonds. In 2020, we issued the first one. In 2021, we went once again to the Euros market. And starting in 2022, what you see here on May, we inaugurated the market and the local market in pesos. We have also participated in US dollars and assets market. We have received lessons at the sovereign level. We have received a positive answer in relation to the demand and the diversification of investors with DG criteria. So this has been a good signal and good practice of transparency. It has been pretty well accepted in the market. That is why we have been recognized through different awards. We have been received several awards, several bonds awards and environmental finances. Recently, we received an award in 2023 by climate concern. So, what is the expectation in the future with the SDG link bonds? We're going to publish our third report of assignment and impact by the end of October, early November. But this has been a joint effort from finances to other ministries on how to standardize processes in relation to reports. Finally, I'd like to mention practical cases related to the agricultural aspect. Therefore, it's not only by the sovereign, but it has to be a joint effort in terms of development bank, and we have an important relation with the bank that issues a thematic bond related to agricultural impact, but also with social impact. They issue a social bond of gender very quickly. In our eligible expenditures, we have programs that are related to agriculture, and this is related to the SDG link band 2. We have several programs, for example, Sowing Life, Production for Wellbeing. These three programs are to identify the medium-sized and small-sized farmers that produce. One is to promote sustainable actions in the field, and number two, to provide this economic support, particularly to these farmers, for them to implement and assure their production as well as the food safety, food security. So we leave you here the link in case you like to have more information about our SDGs link bonds. And with this, I conclude and I give the floor back to Erin. Thank you. Thank you, Yunuel. We have some minutes for one or two questions if you would like to type them in the chat box. With that, you facilitate the process and we progress with the use time use. Maybe we can take advantage of this time to ask a little bit about the gender band that you mentioned. What is this for people that are listening this term for the first time, or for people that are listening about bonds for the first time? With the gender band, the purpose is to reduce the gender gaps. We have seen that sometimes women may be late in economic aspects and at the field level. So this relates, they support the economic support for women. So supporting a little bit more women. There to say that Chile recently uh, recently did that. I was very happy to learn that they have this SDG link bond in Chile, and including the gender one, which is to assure a given percentage of women in high positions in companies, in top positions in companies, or these type of things that we have in the region. This is what the gender bonus band is about. Excellent. Thank you very much. Also, participant requested the link to get more information about the bonds. If you could help us with this information in the chat box, we will appreciate that. Sure, I will share that. Thank you for your presentation. Okay, now let's move to the next presentation. Oh, we're gonna move to the next speaker, Ivan Cruz from the Dominican Republic. Ivan, can you open your mic? I will share my screen.
Para su presentación se ve y
la pude compartir y ya.
¿Ah, sí?
Okay, for your presentation. Okay, let me close. Let me stop sharing my screen. Okay, go ahead. Ivan, thank you very much for being here with us. Okay. Please let me know if you can see it. It's not on presentation mode.
¿Se ve mi presentación?
Can you see presentation?
Ok, dame un segundito.
Sí, claro que sí.
Ahora sí.
Ahora sí.
Positivo. Okay, now we see it. Okay, perfect.
Venía acá a mencionarles un tanto de lo que hemos
So I was here to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in Dominican Republic with the thing about climate financing, and to share a little bit of what Dominican Republic is doing. And We had a video with the climate scenarios in Dominican Republic, and here I like how the map is, you see the concentrations with the years and what is the reality, and then what is how they're susceptible to climate change. Every time we introduce this video, it shows a lot of problems because, especially in this region over here, that we go by Samana, we see how the island completely disappeared and it separates from the main island and it becomes just a smaller island. So this gives us a lot of things to do on financing. So how does climate change affect Dominican Republic? The economic loss due to natural disasters are 4.8% of our GDP in 22, projected to 2030. There's going to be an annual average temperature increase of 2.5 centigrades to 5 centigrades. And there are going to be more days with temperatures higher than 35 degrees by 2050, and it's going to be a reduction of the annual precipitation on 35% of 35%. And there's going to be an increase of sea level that is going to be of zero point 0.5 meters by 2050, and there's going to be a reduction of the coastline in the country. The 23.2% of the credit lines of the banks and non-financial societies are exposed to tropical cyclones, especially during the hurricane season, and we are the 10th country in the world with more losses due to extreme events, accumulating about 5.3 billion and from 1997 to 2016. Also considering that we share our island with one of the most vulnerable countries to these events, Haiti, which has important social conditions, being the poorest country in the region. So this calls to a need of financing at a national level. In our NDC for 2020 and the National Adaptation Plan, we estimate that we need 8.9 billion for mitigations and 8.6 billion for adaptation. And we've been doing an adaptation of these results together with the World Bank. And we still have estimates that we are below the requires NEEM, the required amounts for additional 3.5 billion so that we can be able to accomplish the goals that we have on our NDC. So, and now putting into context, this we need the financing, sustainable financing. And let me put this into context a little bit.
Dentro del
What
marco
are sustainable finances? Within the sustainable development framework, we have the social, the economical, and the governmental. When we are talking about financing, related to mitigation, we are talking about financing for low carbon. That's where we have carbon markets. When we talk about finance and climate, we talk about climate finances. And when we have other environmental factors, we are now talking about green finance. And if we bring this all the way to the social area, then we have social environmental finances. But within what we are working at the Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources,
hablando ya de un
in
financiamiento
Dominican Republic, we are talking about a sustainable financing because it includes all three areas of sustainable development and the environmental area, other environmental areas that I mentioned before. And so it means it includes the environmental, the social, the economical, and the other important aspects of governability. The main finance sources in Dominican Republic are international cooperation, is helping us every day to be able to comply with these goals, especially Germany, France, the European Union, the United States, among others. Much of the cooperation from the European Union is coming through a program, Euroclimate, that we are about to launch, in fact. and bilateral institutions, cooperations. We have the participation of organizations such as the Development Bank, the World Bank, the Andean Promotion the German Cooperation Agency, and other stakeholders. In climate funds, we have direct access to the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the World Fund for the Environment, and the Special Fund for Climate Change. When we are looking into other stakeholders, such as the private sector, we see the private sector has very little participation in the financing, but they do participate. What they do participate is in projects such as renewable energy and electromobility. In public spending, we have right now a classifier that we started executing this year to include public spending destined to climate change, and we have discovered that this has been reducing as the years go by. And here on the slide, we are able to see in certain times of the year, certain seasons where we have been going higher is because of important climate events that went through the country. And we see an increase in 2017 due to these events. And what it is has been reducing the public spending in the country. This main sources of cooperation here, I like to mention or show this slide because we see here that we are, really not doing enough with the financing of adaptation measures. Most of the activities that we see, that we look into, that are financed are water and sanitation. We have transportation and energy. When we look at our portfolio on green funds, we see that we have a total emissions of 83.3 million, but in the Green Climate Fund, we still don't have any projects, national projects, since we don't have any accredited entities. And then I'm going to tell you in just a moment what we are doing to improve that. In our adaptation fund, we do have some activities, especially for the water and sanitation sector. And in the REC, yes, we have been in the GAF, we have been recruiting projects. We have 13 regional projects and 7 national projects that are being implemented right now. The current situation of the Dominican Republic, we are trying to implement a strategy for climate financing that considers these aspects. First is to create the enabling conditions to mobilize climate financing, and then develop the implementation of projects so that we can have access to climate financing. And for that, we have established this strategy of climate financing that is very broad, and we have shown improvement in each of those areas. Our green taxonomy, we started, in fact, this week. Tomorrow we're going to be launching. No, today we're going to be officially launching. The public phase of our green taxonomy, which includes 5 sectors, 5 of the most important sectors in the country, which will help us identify what are the activities that actually are green in our industry, but also helps us to identify that greenwashing, right? To avoid that sort of practice. And in the market, we do see them a lot. We have been working with green funds. Right now, the ministry has an agreement of collaboration with the ABAN, which is the Multiple Bank Association at Dominican Republic, which is we're trying to look for ways to make our banking system greener. We are starting 3 processes with 3 banks that are affiliated to the ABA to start issuing these blue and green bonds that not only focus on the green, we're also working with blue bonds with 3 of the banks, members of the ABA. The public-private partnership, this is something that we are also working very closely with the private partnerships committee. And in carbon markets, we are doing a lot of things to prepare ourselves for the carbon market, but we also have the current experience with the World Bank and their carbon cooperation fund, in which through programs, the Red Plus program, we have been trying to manage our payments by results, and the first payment is soon to be effective to the beneficiaries in the first quarter of next year. We are also trying to accredit three different entities in the Climate Green Fund, getting accredited in Green Climate Fund so that we can have direct access to those funds, and we can have national projects, which is where we believe we've been staying a little bit behind as a country.
por naturaleza.
We are also looking into the exchange by nature for nature. We have two high-level conversations with our treasury authorities and other national authorities so that we can start looking into the possibilities of having any sort of exchange of nature. And we saw the case of Belize, we saw the case of Ecuador and others in the region that have really been showing very good results in these matters. And each of the options that we see below here, these are actions that are enabling so that we can have the development of the funds that I mentioned before. Now, regarding the agricultural sector, I did bring several projects that we are implementing and that I understand in the presentation that we're going to share, you're going to have a lot more information about them, and especially the project Climate Winner, where we have GEFA funds to implement, focusing especially on family agriculture. And as an objective, it has mitigation of climate change, the restorations of the degraded soils through practices that are climate smart in the livestock sector. We also have financing of $5 million with the FAO and the Agricultural Bank of Dominican Republic. Basically, this agreement is going to allow 500 small to medium farmers become part of the weather winner. And we also have recently approved a project to strengthen financing for the agricultural sector with a focus on technology and sustainable technology in the Dominican Republic. It has been approved with the Central American Development Economic Integration Development Bank, the BESIE, and a project in the Dominican Republic that will benefit 3,000 farmers of the agricultural sector. And we also have right now, we sent to Congress a credit line of $120 million by the Inter-American Development Bank to acquire new technologies, making a revolution of the agricultural sector in Dominican Republic. And this, we are included in this process that is starting in the bank right now. And the idea is that this will be implemented through the tools and the programs that the bank itself has. And basically, I'm going to leave this out for all of you so that you can have information about the different projects that we have in the agricultural sector specifically, and that the Agricultural Bank, the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Environment as support are financing these activities through the tools that you already know. I believe that's everything I had for you today. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And if you have any question, let me know.
Muchísimas gracias, Iván, por
Thank you very much, Ivan, for your presentation. Very thorough information. I don't know if anyone would like to have a question to our speaker, for a speaker. You can do so through the chat. And something that I believe was very interesting about your presentation is how you are diversifying the financing sources and different strategies being used by the country. Many of our participants that listen to these webinars, they come from islands in the Caribbean as well, where they are also trying to structure programs to help the agricultural sector and the livestock sector. I don't know if you could maybe give us a little more details about diversifying from different sources and how is it useful and what do you see are the possible results on the long term for the sector?
Sí, básicamente, qué bueno que lo
Yes,
reconoce
thank you.
porque
I'm glad that you acknowledge that, Aaron, because something that we have been looking into, although the scope is not that clear at the beginning because of the financing the Dominican Republic is having. We see that there's no single solution to be able to get the financing that has been promised for years and during the conventions. And what Dominican Republic is doing is precisely to have a pool of options, multiple options that can help us drive this sort of tools and have this sort of tools available for our society and accelerate the financing process which is what we require to make sure we meet our NDCs. Now, we know, having this understood within the ministry, we create this department of finance mechanisms and portfolio management to be able to accelerate and have a special critical understanding of climate financing. And we as countries are going to be able to have the possibility to access the more biggest amount of available funds, not only looking into international cooperations, because we know that this is less and less every time, but being able to identify support sources and that the private sector also gets involved in these processes. That has been a little bit of the way we see it from the Dominican Republic's government, current administration.
Gracias. Y también se nota que las
Thank you. Yes, I can see that the financing scales are very different with each stakeholder. So, for example, the structural financing that getting from the development bank comes in a different scale with different commitments. The other specific projects that you mentioned from FAO and from the GEF. Yes, that's right.
Muchas gracias, Iván.
Oh, thank you very much, Ivan. Now we go to our ex, next speaker, Maria Paz Gutierrez from the Ministry of Treasury of Chile. Hi, yes, please open your mic and your video, and I will be sharing your slides, right? Thank you. I do have a problem because it tells me that I cannot turn on my camera because the host has not enabled it. Sure, let me check on that. And can we get access Maria's profile and enable her to turn on her camera? Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
Ahí sí.
Now you can see me?
Sí, y comparto.
Okay, let me start sharing your screen. We can see you, but
Qué extraño,
okay.
¿no?
Nothing yet?
Em,
Okay.
Pues tal vez vamos a
Well, okay, maybe just let's start with the presentation without video. That's okay. I believe we can see your screen, right? We can see the presentation, right? Yes, it's not on full screen.
ahora
bueno,
sí.
sí, ahí
Okay,
sí.
how about now?
Muchas
Yes,
gracias.
now it is. Okay, thank you very much, Aaron, and also hi to everybody, colleagues from different countries. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity, giving my country the opportunity to share a little bit of what we are doing from the Ministry of Treasury in matters of how to promote the finances for climate and change implementation and adaptation at a national level. Okay, so let's see if we can go to the next slide. So we know that the challenge of sustainable development that is resilient and all of this goes into what my colleague before me was saying in the previous presentation. It's a challenge that includes multilateral organizations as well as the private sector and public sector. The public sector is not the only one that has challenges, especially in the finances. Next slide, please, Erin. But clearly, it's one of the main stakeholders. And in Chile, we've seen this as a state challenge, not only as a current administration. And the same way happen in other countries. We have been looking into several teams that deal with these topics. They stay after the administration a lot of times, and there's a lot of ministries that are involved and also at the Ministry of Treasury, of course, which has a very important role in terms of financing these activities. Next slide. Okay, a little bit about what Chile has done in terms not only on the financing, but in terms of facing the climate change and the biodiversity crisis. We have our NDC, which was updated in 2020 with a little bit more demanding process. And we had a long-term project that has a lot of different goals under different umbrellas on mitigation, adaptation, and others such as socio-ecological fair transition. We also have not so far ago, not so long ago, it's a climate change framework law that makes this binding the carbon neutrality goal by 2050. And also, it makes binding the creation of these management instruments, such as the long term climate strategy and also the financial strategy, right? How we implementing the specific goals to be able to reach this big goal of carbon neutrality and this other goals in diversity, but also how do we finance them? And it's based on this that we have created other strategies such as the green financing and national specific topic for biodiversity. We also created a new biodiversity service for protected areas that is going to be in charge of the financing and administration of the public protected marine and private protected areas that used to be under different organizations, and now we have put them all together under a single umbrella. Next slide. So all of these big measures and these big commitments that we are having at a national level, we have to finance them in some way. So this is where the role of the Ministry of Treasury is fundamental. We have to understand that the Ministry of Treasury, from one side, are supervising public spending. And so we're going to determine what is the fiscal effort, how much is the fiscal effort that we are assigning to face these challenges of climate change, of biodiversity, and sustainable development. And the Treasury is also setting the taxes and the fiscal control. So we have a clear role in the coordination and implementation of the financing in the private sector. And we have also a proper role in managing our public debt. And there was already mentioned how the Ministry of Treasury can create debt strategies to take advantage of these opportunities brought in by transitions. We can also help mobilize private resources as a catalyzer of the discussion through a series of incentives and frameworks and regulatory modifications such as tax law that obviously can help to find new sources of financing. Also, something that we didn't mention a lot, but I believe is important as a Ministry of Treasury to coordinate the government actions among the different ministries, but also along the cooperation of international cooperation. The ministries are privileged counterparts. For example, development multilateral banks can look for to be our contact points. And last, we have a very important role in terms of investment and public hiring defining the conditions on the standards, the public standards, and that at the end of the day, it's a great example for everything that is the private sector. The next slide, please. And so, based on this role that the Ministry of Treasury has from Chile, we created a strategy that has to be followed by our ministry or by our green financing office. After understanding very well the role that we have, what we do is we create a department for green financing, and we we propose a strategy, which is our financial strategy facing climate change. That was the first name, which has three pillars. On one side is to have greener finances, meaning how do we support the generation of information so that we can include the climate factors, biodiversity factors, and every decision making and the information that we have available. And once finance is greener, we look into how do we finance what's green? How do we mobilize financing available so that we go for the green options? It has to do a lot with the development of economic instruments that help move the financing. And then a third pillar will be mostly how do we capture the opportunity? How do we make our financial system more competitive in these same terms? And how we consider a regional leadership in this area. So our alignment of our strategy, green strategy, started in 2019, and then we have a new version in 2022. And now we are working on the third update, and this third update is going to be even more in depth of an update. We no longer want our strategy just to say things like support or try to incentivize the emission of sovereign topic bonds. And we want to be more specific. Okay, yes, we want sovereign bonds for what purpose, right? A purpose on gender, a purpose on biodiversity. Why? Because that's the gap on the financing. And how do we know that's the financial gap? And to be able to get to that financing gap is where we are today creating a series of analysis in terms of the cost of the long-term climate strategy, right? How much does it cost us to implement a series of commitments and challenges that we have in our management instruments? And at the same time, how much are we spending today in these issues and cross-reference this database to understand where our main financing gaps. So this is the upcoming update in 2024. It's going to continue to have these three main pillars, but the idea here is that we have more in-depth analysis of which economic sectors are included in these gaps and which regions of the country are in these gaps, and where should we channel our resources. And for example, hopefully we could have some sort of measure like promoting the emission of the theme bonds, like I said before, but focused on biodiversity for each region, X region, because that's where we have a financial gap. And so that's hopefully what we are looking to do. Now, let's go to the next slide, please. Now, I'm going to go on the first pillar here, which talks a little bit about how do we make finances better, greener? How do we make sure that we align ourselves with what we have available? And here we have four initiatives: the public-private partnership roundtable on green finances and taxonomy, something that there's been a lot said. We have measurements of public-private spending on climate change. That's another thing.
Capital natural. Entonces, yendo a la
And
siguiente.
measurement of the natural capital. Next slide. The first thing, the public-private green finances table was one of the first measures we did. And it is a group that integrated regulators and financial supervisors with all the associations of the bank association, insurance association. And the first thing was that they signed a green agreement with voluntary commitments 4 years at the 4 years term. So the voluntary commitments signed by the banking sector are different to the ones signed by the insurance companies. These commitments had a lot to do on how these entities are managing risk and how they manage the climate risk, biodiversity aspect within their risk management models. And for example, for investment decision making related to some areas, so a series of self-imposed measures imposed by each sector. That led us to do a yearly basis follow-up to understand a little bit where the main gaps are located. From the financial side, why these financial entities could not invest in these green products or have problems to integrate climate risk and biodiversity in the models. Next slide, please. According to the conversations from this group and the Green Agreement, we got these general standards that we have, or general regulations that we have nowadays that force entities to be ruled by the financial market, and they force them to disseminate information in the annual minutes related to ESG aspects and particularly of social and environmental governance aspects. Next slide. So then another initiative is the taxonomy. We mentioned already taxonomy, but the taxonomy is very important to give transparency to the markets and for all of us to speak the same language and to understand it. I mean, to avoid having an agricultural activity like reforestation, for example, for all of us to understand that if we do the activity in this way, the activity may be related to sustainable aspect. But if I call it differently, I don't know, use of water was it may not be considered as environmentally sustainable. So it forces us to uh, act in this way. In the case of Chile, in the case of Chile, the truth is that we have been working in this since 2021 and 2022. We try to organize the taxonomy framework to understand what the sectors and activities are. In 2023, we launched the taxonomy framework, but we still need to define this technical criterion that will give us the thresholds for each activity to be considered environmentally sustainable. So we are missing the technical part, and this is what we'd like to do in 2024. And we hope we're going to have a taxonomy in 2024 completed. This is absolutely pertinent if we want to get the funding for activities of this kind with these categories, green categories, because at the end of the day, we can have a classification with the agreement of all of us, a transparent classification, and that gives confidence to the investor. In terms of expenditure and investment in climate change, we have had several pilots ex ante. I mean, when the budget is being developed, or exports, when the expenditure budget has been executed. The idea is to understand when this expenditure is planned, in this case, only for climate change. The idea is to extend the exercise to biodiversity things. The idea is to understand what is planned and what was executed, and how it portfolio classifies the investment. We are also working with public companies, and this has been very important. And simultaneously, we are advancing in having the web platform. We have a lot of and reports, but for citizens, these reports are difficult to understand, to digest. So we're trying to make this more friendly using a platform for people to go into the platform and to understand what is being done, and also private expenses. So we are starting with a pilot related to public private expenses. This is very important to cross information related to the financial needs. If we understand how much and where we are spending the money and where our main expenditures are, and we cross these two databases, we will really understand where the main needs are. Next. Something very innovative and interesting, a line of work, a new line of work that is related to natural capital measurement. So this means to value the natural assets and land areas, water areas with their ecosystems. And the idea is to understand their value in relation to the inputs and environmental services provided for economic production. Why do we want to measure this? Well, on one hand, it helps us in terms of the national accounts, but it is also important for decision-making purposes, public and private decision makings. This is very important for the projects. We can also guide public policy, financial and investment decisions, and it will also let us in the future, will let us to progress in terms of developing new financial instruments. This is one example, nature-backed securities, how we can play with the financial instruments when we better understand, when we have a better understanding of the natural capital, the value of the underlying things on an instrument that is based in biodiversity or natural aspects. The second pillar, and how we promote financial instruments. Here we have this thematic sovereign bond, green tax instruments, and how we facilitate the flow of international resources. So there are these counterparts that are privileged from multilateral companies, and with them we can channel international funds for national projects. Chile has played a leadership role in these thematic bonds. In 2019, we were the first country of the continent in issuing green bonds. From 2020 and 2021, we issued the social bonds. In March 2022, we were the first country issuing a bond linked to sustainability goals. Those are different compared to the green bonds. The use of resources is specific for a project portfolio. And in this case, we have a bond linked to targets or to goals. The value of the bond will vary according to the compliance of the goals. So it is related to the goals we committed to achieve. In the case of these goals, on a first phase, we only talked about goals related to greenhouse gases mitigation, and in terms of a clean energy percentage in our national system related to energy. But this year in 2023, we made a modification of the framework and we issued the first bond including a KPI, an indicator linked to gender equity and women empowerment in high positions, as mentioned before. And this position as number one in the world ranking in terms of volume of ESG bonds. The graph is not updated because yesterday there was a new issuance, but this is for you to have an idea. Our bond stock, sovereign bond stock is 32% is thematic bonds. So the ESG category But our strategy is to raise the ratio of these ones, 50% in 4 years term. Green tax instruments. You tell me if I still have time. We have a green tax that was implemented in 2017. The taxes to mobile sources and fixed sources. This tax is low, $5 a ton of CO2. In 2020, it is reformed. The cost does not change, but we introduce the possibility to compensate emissions. We can pay the tax or compensate the emissions going to a market where we buy credits, carbon credits. This introduces a national carbon market. And then in 2022, the climate change framework law introduces negotiable emissions certificates. Why is this different compared to an emission market? It introduces a limit. It sets a limit of emissions by industry and gives permits, and they can be negotiated. This is not under operation yet, and will be. And this is to understand that nowadays the law says that we need a market with tradable certificate emissions. And we are now faced with a new tax reform. The idea is to agree a series of tax modifications, mainly in terms of the CO2 price, but also accompanied by tax benefits for individuals and companies that carry out some activities and green investment in relation to a better efficiency. Now, getting to the end of the presentation to capture the opportunity. We really care for the global positioning for this. For us, this is very important. How, as a country, we learn from international actions, and we have this link with other countries to share experiences, but also to see how we can position ourselves as leaders and how we can have pilots of some things. So in relation to the bonds, we were one of the first ones. We were sort of a pilot for many countries. And of course, our interest is to participate in the global initiatives, everything related to taxonomy at the global level, to always be updated. So this is it. Thank you very much. And I'm open to questions. I don't know if you are able to see me. My camera is black. Thank you, Maria. You could try to turn off the camera and to turn it off again. No, it is not working. No, it does not work. Sorry. Thank you. And great presentation. I'm really interested, and maybe in the final comments around, we can go back to the topic of Maria's presentation, which is the evolution, program's evolution. For example, on one of the slides, she showed that Chile has more than 10 years working on a carbon tax and price. So these processes are steps made one by one in order to progress. This cannot be achieved from day to night. There is a question in the chat box for you, Maria. It says, in this national construction for investing in climate funding led by Ministry of Finances, you consider the participation of the private sector and thinking in the climate implementation. Is there any guidance to integrate the key sectors such as the agricultural sector? Well, she mentioned the idea to involve the banks and other priorities and ESG policies. I don't know if you could talk about other sectors outside the financial sector that are important to include in these processes. Could you? Yes, a good question. It is our Achilles heel. The financial ministry finances and how to do this is difficult. We always start with the financial sector. So organizing this public and private group. But we realized something recently. Maybe you will realize it before than us. We realized that the financial sector cannot move forward without the private sector. If we talk to the financial sector, helping banks for the dissemination aspect of these topics or for them to invest in products of this category, for them, having the information of the productive sector was vital. So we, this is evident, but even sometimes we cannot think on this right from the beginning. We should continue working with the productive sectors. This is what we realize in all these type of matters. And we are doing this now. We are getting involved with the productive sector, with the real sector, large sector with many associations. And this is complicated and where the agricultural sector plays a vital role. I believe that the only guidance emphasizing your question is hopefully we could try to include the productive sector as soon as possible. Otherwise, the counterpart of the Ministry of Finances is the financial sector. But if we want to work with the financial sector, we need to work with the productive sector as well. This is the message I would like to leave you.
Pues muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Y yo creo que estas presentaciones
I believe these presentations give us a broader scenario of what the countries are considering in order to structure the different strategies in different parts of the different stakeholders of the economy and seeing the different tools that we can evolve step by step. Thank you, Maria Paz Gutierrez, for your presentation from Chile's Ministry of Finance. Thanks for the invitation. Next time, I hope my camera will work, my video will work. Thank you. We have some time, sir, to listen comments and final comments and reflections from the speakers. I have Yunwen, Maria Paz. Yunwen, could you open your video? I believe Ivan had to leave. So we thank his participation from the Dominican Republic.
Si podemos, por favor, escuchar de los expositores.
If the speakers can make
finales que
about final matters that you may have, particularly if you have any reflection about the participation of other sectors in these processes and also about the need to generate these tools step by step. I mean, if you have had the experiences of starting with the broader bonds, and then you have experience with more specific bonds, or as Maria Paz mentioned, linking the bonds with the goals, or where there are these gaps regarding the funding. That will be interesting for participants here because many participants are also in the public sector and they have jobs related to these topics. They are working with topics related to these ones. So type of information is important to improve the tools and to ensure that there is funding necessary to implement the necessary activities to be resilient to climate change. Any comment? Maybe you could start with Yunwen. Your comment, Yunwen. Thank you. Yes. As closing message, what we have seen here from Mexico is that it is important to involve the dialogue, the active dialogue with other ministries. For example, with the Ministry of Agriculture or Well-being or the Environment. Why? Because there is also, to be able to promote transparency, we need to promote the best information available and the diversity of the information. This can be achieved using this dialogue, interministerial dialogue. It also helps to avoid that we fall in the greenwashing. Many of you have heard this. For those who have not heard this, so the information is what the information given is not accurate in relation to what you are doing in relation to sustainability. On one hand, on the other hand, this type of tools, tax policy or other policies, like implementing a taxonomy at the country level, we need to be clear, both for the private sector as Bank of Development and for the public sector. First is to define what is sustainable and what is not. And on the other hand, to identify and analyze what the needs are in order to reduce the gaps, in this case, agricultural gaps, and how to benefit the population, a bigger number of the population in these late regions to advance on the green agenda on one hand with climate change, and on the other hand, to actively close the social gaps that exist in the country. And finally, I believe it is a joint effort. So having with a common language, we can then to talk on how to mobilize and speed up this capital to achieve the goals of the social agenda and the green agenda. Thank you, Maria. Floor is yours. On my on my side, I agree with you, Nguyen, but I also believe that something we have realized and the Chilean Ministry of Finances is that things that are not measured cannot be managed. And this is a challenge, an important challenge. And by measuring, there are many things to measure. So if we have a financial strategy, we need to understand the cost. We need to understand where the expenses are going to. We also need to understand or to know what is it that we want. What do we consider environmentally sustainable? So what goes in or does not go in this folder of initiatives? And also, what is the value of the ecosystems behind these economic activities? The truth is that the measurement and the information is vital. And this is something the public sector cannot do on its own. So we need the private sector as well. Therefore, working hand in hand with the private sector and financial sector is important. But as it was mentioned, working with the productive sector is also crucial. So once with the information raised, we can have better guidance for decision-making purposes. Many ministries, including us, as raising information, is collecting information is difficult. So we start implementing instruments such as the bonds in 2019 without the financial strategy and progressing with the financial strategy on a simultaneous basis. It is not that we do not have to do anything at all, but we need to know to keep balance. Yes, that's true. These public processes that are living in the government need to be linked and aligned with the private sector, not only in the country, but also with the financial sector, international financial sector, particularly in the agricultural sector, where many products are related in the country, but also abroad. It is also interesting that you mentioned the values for people here from the agricultural sector. It is interesting to listen that the financial sector is interested not only in the earnings and financial aspect of the production, but they are interested in the other values that are part of the agricultural sectors and the agricultural systems related to the environment, the ecosystem services, and the social values and the social impact programs may have to strengthen the resiliency of the sector. For participants, it is important to think on these other guidelines or values that are part of the decision and taxonomy of projects that they will fund later. This, your presentations have been of great use for us. From Ivan Cruz, Union Hernandez Zuno, and Maria Paz Gutierrez from Chile, Mexico, and Dominican Republic. We see that there are important gaps regarding the funding of the climate action, but we are also seeing a lot of innovation and sophistication in the tools, in the financial tools that are being developed in this sector. So we hope to continue learning and following the work and the participation from our sector. Thank you so much again for your participation. Thanks for the invitation. Thank you so much. So with this, we end this webinar. Thanks for being here with us. Okay, have a nice rest of the day. Have a nice rest of the day.
Um,